embarrassing when you think about it. Ask someone to name the three branches of government, and they can probably tell you about the president and about Congress. And then they'll scratch their heads and start guessing. No one remembers the judiciary, possibly because of the horrible fashion sense of the judges and justices. Graduation robes? Really? Oddly enough, even the founders seem to have treated the Supreme Court and the rest of the judiciary as the stepchildren of the federal government. The Constitution is very vague about the Supreme Court, almost as if the founders got writer's cramp and were just in a hurry to finish. The only thing the document really says is that the Supreme Court exists. Hurrah! As far as what it's actually supposed to do, well, if you listen real closely, you'll hear the sound of crickets chirping in the silence. The Supreme Court, almost from the very beginning, the case of Marbury versus Madison, have claimed the right of judicial review, the ability, in other words, to declare a law or act of the government unconstitutional. In other words, they gave themselves a job. Unfortunately, the court, which is kind of a slang term for the Supreme Court, lacks any kind of enforcement power, and relies mostly on tradition to enforce its rulings. Presidents and Congress can and have defied a court's ruling in the past. It took decades for schools to desegregate after the case of Brown v. Board of Education in the 50s. The last school district to desegregate in Texas did so in the 90s. The Supreme Court has ordered Presidents Bush and Obama to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, to no avail. Andrew Jackson's famous quote on hearing that the Supreme Court had decided it was unconstitutional to force the Native Americans to leave their land on the eastern seaboard? "I've heard the Chief Justice give his opinion, now let's see him enforce it." He had the Army move the Cherokee forcibly from their lands anyway, along the Trail of Tears. The 9 justices of the court hold life appointments from the president, and they also have to be approved by the Senate. Yet another defense against passion in politics. They are neither responsible to the people directly during an election, nor appointed by them. There is something special about a group of men and women locking themselves in a room and using their intellects to solve a pressing issue. The Supreme Court does not try cases in a normal manner. While lawyers do get to argue in front of the court, they first have to submit a report, a brief on their position, and the justices will have talked amongst themselves before and after the hearing about the virtues of the argument. The hearing itself is rather tense. The lawyers have a set time to lay out their case and can be questioned, often harshly, by the justices who are seeking to test the limits of the position's logic. The court's decision in a case, especially a Supreme Court decision, becomes what we call precedent. Basically, it can be used by lawyers from now until the end of time to back up their argument. If Dr. Pepper is suddenly and shockingly made illegal, I could look back through old Supreme Court cases, find that Justice Soda Pop said in 1923 that to make Dr. Pepper illegal would be unconstitutional and insane, and I would quote him in court. Positions without precedent aren't really good positions. These kinds of legal arguments don't work on common sense or good debating skills. They work on precedent. This is why appointing a justice to the court is very, very important for a president. The words these men and women say in court and write in their decisions become precedent, simply because they've uttered them. It's a shocking and somber responsibility. Also, the court can change its mind and position. After all, in the Dred Scott case before the Civil War, they ruled that slaves were property, not men. Newer precedents usually beat older precedents. You've got to love the idea of the court, though. Great minds arguing great issues until they find a solution. It's like the scientists coming up with the atomic bomb during the Manhattan Project, locked in a compound in New Mexico, or JFK's XCOM, the war cabinet that met to handle the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the Grumman engineering team that was tasked with designing the lunar lander for the moon landing.